We have all seen the movie version of medieval warfare. The camera pans over 10,000 soldiers in gleaming armor, marching in perfect formation across a pristine landscape. They are heading to a glorious battle that will decide the fate of nations. It is majestic, it is heroic, and it is also a complete lie. If those movies were accurate, half of those men would be dying of dysentery, the other half would be starving, and behind that cool formation of soldiers would be a chaotic city of refugees, merchants, and families stretching back for 10 miles. We tend to obsess over the battles Agincourt, Hastings, Manzikert, but the real war wasn't fought against the enemy king. It was fought against calories. Today, we are going to look at the unsexy, gritty, and often horrifying reality of how medieval armies actually moved. We are talking about the tyranny of the wagon, the sheer violence of foraging, and why an army on the march was basically a rolling humanitarian disaster. Part 1. The Tyranny of the Wagon. To understand why medieval war looked the way it did, you have to understand one simple, brutal mathematical problem. Historians call it the tyranny of the wagon equation. Here is the setup. You are a king. You want to invade your neighbor. You raise an army of, let's say, 20,000 soldiers. Now you need to feed them. A pre-industrial army is a hungry beast. A standard soldier needs about 3,000 calories a day just to keep marching. But it's not just the men. You have thousands of horses for the cavalry and pack animals to carry the tents and arrows. All told, a modest army of 30,000 entities, people, and animals needs tons of food every single day. So you think, I'll just bring the food with me from home. And that is the tyranny. You load a wagon with grain. But the horse pulling the wagon needs to eat that grain to survive the trip. Mathematical models show that a wagon team will eat up its own payload in a surprisingly short amount of time. If you try to carry enough food for a month-long campaign, the animals hauling the food will eat all the food before you even get there. This means that medieval armies had a strict operational range. They could not simply pack a lunchbox and march across Europe. They had to get their food from the place they were currently standing. This brings us to a polite military euphemism, foraging. Part 2. The food Piñata. When we hear the word foraging, we might imagine soldiers picking berries in the woods or hunting a deer. That is not what happened. In military history, foraging means taking the food from the local population. Think of a medieval village as a food piñata. Farmers work all year to harvest grain in the summer. They store it to survive the winter. Then an army shows up. To a general, that village represents 70,000 man-days of calories sitting in a barn. The army doesn't ask nicely. They send out large detachments, sometimes a third of the entire army, to strip the countryside bare, and I do mean strip it bare. They took the grain, the livestock, the fodder for the horses, and the firewood. If you were a peasant in the path of an army, even a friendly army, it was a catastrophe. If the army was hostile, it was an apocalypse. Foraging parties were often the most violent part of the war. They would burn what they couldn't carry to deny it to the enemy. They would torture locals to reveal where the seed grain was hidden. This system had a massive impact on strategy. It meant medieval campaigns were strictly seasonal. You couldn't invade in the winter because the food had already been eaten. You had to wait for the grass to grow to feed your horses. That's called green fodder. And for the harvest to come in so you could steal the grain. Furthermore, raw grain isn't enough. You can't just chew on wheat stalks. it needs to be processed. The Roman legions were famous for carrying hand mills to grind their own flour, allowing them to bake bread on the march. But many medieval armies lacked this discipline. If they couldn't find mills in the villages they looted, soldiers often resorted to boiling grain into a mush or porridge, which was far less nutritious and terrible for morale. Part 3. The Paperwork of War. Now it is easy to think of this as pure chaos, just a mob of armed men stealing chickens. But surprisingly, successful medieval warfare required an immense amount of bureaucracy. We often imagine the Dark Ages as a time without administration, but that is wrong. Take Charlemagne, for example. In the late 8th century, his government issued the Capitulary de Villiers, a detailed set of instructions for managing royal estates to support the army. These weren't just farms. They were military supply depots. The stewards of these estates were required to produce and store specific amounts of shields, spears, and arrows. They had to maintain wagons called bastionnae that were specifically waterproofed, so they could float across rivers without ruining the flour inside. This level of planning continued for centuries. Surviving records from the Carolingian and Ottonian dynasties show detailed reports submitted to the royal court every Christmas, listing exactly how much grain, wine, and livestock was available for the next summer's campaign. War was not just fighting, it was paperwork. Without these detailed inventories, a king wouldn't know where to march his army without them starving. They essentially had to pre-position supplies along the route, creating a corridor of food before the army even left home. Part 4. The Horse Problem. We also have to talk about the horses. In movies, horses are just vehicles. You put gas in, they go. But a medieval warhorse was a fragile, high-maintenance athlete. During the Edwardian campaigns in Scotland in the late 13th century, records show the English army had to import 20 tons of oats per day just to feed the 3,000 primary warhorses. That does not even include the thousands of pack animals carrying the baggage. And you can't just feed them oats. They need volume. They need hay and grazing. This is why armies often had to disperse over a wide area. If 20,000 horses stay in one spot for 3 days, they will eat every blade of grass for miles. Then there is the issue of shoes. A horse throwing a shoe on a rocky road is a disaster. It goes lame, and you lose a valuable asset. The English royal campaigns employed armies of farriers and transported thousands of prefabricated horseshoes and nails in barrels to the front lines. In 1298 alone, over 13,000 horse hooves required attention during the campaign. Transporting these beasts was even worse. If you were crossing the sea, say for a crusade, you had to load 2,000 stallions onto wooden boats. These were not calm ponies. They were aggressive war horses trained to bite and kick. They often fought each other on the ships. It was a logistical horror show that required winches, slings, and nerves of steel just to get the army to the starting line. Part 5. The Invisible Army. Back on land, if we look at the marching column, we see the soldiers. But if we zoomed the camera out, we would see something totally different. We would see women, children, merchants, and priests. These were the camp followers. In many medieval armies, the non-combatants actually outnumbered the soldiers. Hollywood usually cuts these people out, but the army literally could not function without them. Who washed the clothes? Who nursed the sick? Who cooked the food? It wasn't the knights. It was the camp followers. There were two types. First, the professionals, laundry women, sutlers, merchants who sold alcohol and extra food, and craftsmen. But this second group was the families. Wives and children often had no way to survive at home when the husband left, so they walked with the army. This created a massive logistical nightmare. These people needed to be fed and protected, too. They slowed the army down, but they also provided the essential services that kept the army alive. Interestingly, this didn't really change until the 19th century. It wasn't until militaries created professional medical corps and supply lines that they stopped relying on this massive civilian tail. Part 6. The Agony of Movement. With all these people, animals, and wagons, moving a medieval army was an agonizingly slow process. It's called the concertina effect. If the guy at the front of the line stops for 30 seconds to tie his shoe, the guy behind him stops. The wave of stopping ripples back. By the time it hits the rear of the column, a mile away, the back of the army might be standing still for an hour. A column of 20,000 troops isn't a tight block. It's a snake. If 2,000 troops take up 1 mile of road, a large army with its baggage train could stretch for 15 or 20 miles. The vanguard could be setting up camp for the night, while the rear guard hasn't even started marching yet. Let's look at a specific example. The March to Manzikert in 1071. The Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes led a massive army across Anatolia. We don't know the exact numbers, but estimates range from 40,000 to over 100,000 men. Moving a force that size through the mountains was a logistical feat. They had to split the army into separate columns just to fit on the roads. They had to send surveyors a day ahead to mark out the next campsite, so that when the tired soldiers arrived, they knew exactly where to pitch their tents. But even with this planning, the march took months. They left Constantinople in late February and didn't reach the battlefield until August. That is 6 months of walking, eating, and trying not to die of disease before you even see the enemy. And the road conditions were brutal. In medieval Anatolia or France, roads were often just dirt tracks. Rain turned them into glue. We have records of the first crusade where the army moved about 6 to 9 miles a day. A single river crossing could take an entire day. If you messed up the schedule, you ended up marching in the dark, losing wagons, and breaking the morale of your men. Conclusion. When we look at military history through the lens of logistics, the glory fades away, and we see the sheer difficulty of it. General Romanos, leading that army to Manzikert, wasn't just thinking about tactics. He was worrying about how to move tens of thousands of people across the mountains without them starving before they even saw a Turk. But the real takeaway is the cost paid by the people who live there. We'd call it foraging. The people of the time called it the fire. Peasants would flee to the forests or high mountains when they saw the dust of an army. They knew that whether the soldiers were enemies or friends, the result was often the same: empty barns, stolen livestock, and a winter of starvation. War is terrible. We should do less of it. But if we are going to study it, we owe it to the people of the past to understand what it actually involved. It wasn't just clashes of swords. It was a brutal struggle for calories, fought on the backs of the peasantry, governed by the tyranny of the wagon. If you enjoyed seeing the gritty mechanics behind the history, please subscribe. It tells the algorithm that history matters. And let me know in the comments, would you rather be a knight with no food or a peasant with a hidden barn? Thanks for watching.